you're ready.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Family Life, brought to you by Faith Tabernacle and Caribbean Evangelical Ministries. I am Sherry Barrow, your host for this evening. Tonight, we continue with another exciting program where we discuss the evolution of love. We invite you to make your interventions via Zoom or our YouTube chat as we spend the next hour focusing on the evolution of love. This evening, we're joined by Pastor Anthony Henry and Pastor Joseph Griffith. Gentlemen, please say something to our audience. Pastor Griffith.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening. It's me again, regular Joseph Griffith.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Family Life, brought to you by Faith Tabernacle and...
Yes, I guess about it.
Sorry
Yes,
about that.
good evening again. It's always those technical little issues that come up every now and then. But as I was saying, me, same Joseph Griffith, always here on Real Talk. Pastor, married couple of years and still going on. Love the Lord and glad to be here. So I think we're in for a good treat this evening and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Sister Sherry. It's good to be with you on the panel again this evening. God is good, and as we continue the discussion this week, we trust that you will be blessed. I know it's exciting, the evolution of love. I'm certain we'd enjoy this one this evening. Lord bless you. I'm gonna keep the rest for the panel when we start. Yes.
Okay. Good evening again. I want you at this time to call your neighbors, call your church family, and invite them on. Trust me, tonight is very, very, very going to be very interesting. As I look through the questions that we have, there are some that I know may make the hair on your head stand. So I want you to invite everyone to come on to be a part, not only to be a part and to learn, but to be a part and to grow with us as we build shatterproof families. Pastors, good evening again. And here is our first question. The virtue of love is eternal and cannot change, but its expression have changed with time. In this regard, the Victorian era is more conservative than the 21st century. What makes it right or wrong for the way one would express love in public? And I'm going to ask Pastor Griffith to share his thoughts on this first.
Well, to start off, I want to support the position that love is eternal and also that self does not change, right? Not subject to change. In fact, I want to anchor that position in 1 John chapter 4:8. I'm quite certain there are other passages appropriately, but this one says, but anyone who does not love does not know God. This is the part, for God is love. And also Malachi chapter 3 verse 6 says, for I am the Lord, I change not. Forget the rest. So when they hold those two together, if God is love, then he's the essence of love. And if he does not change, my argument is that love itself does not change. Then we may ask ourselves then, what is it that really is evolving? Because my idea of evolution suggests like you coming from a lower level of existence, it could be understanding, into an enlargement, growth, or whatever. So what then do I understand when we speak about the evolution of love, right? I believe that, like I said just now, love does not change because of what it really is. But I will want to say up front that there will always be counterfeits, right? So when we are speaking about love and evolution, from my perspective, I see us speaking about how love grows. It moves from one level of intensity, including understanding, etc., and it changes, but it's really about relationship. Love, I'm suggesting, can be likened to like a bond, like a cement that holds relationships together. I mean, you will all agree with me. Everybody know 1 Corinthians 13, right? And for convenience, I just quote 1 or 2 verses where it says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy nor boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with truth. And final, maybe, love bears all things, believes all things, hope all things, endure all things. I think that supports my argument that love is not something static, but it is all the steps that work together to bring about good relationships. Unfortunately, we tend to fall a lot in love. I repeat that. We tend to fall a lot in love and not grow in love. I'm contending we should grow in love. The second clause to the question is, but its expression has evolved. Now, I think that points to the boldness of a liberalized society that is in opposition to the biblical teaching on the subject of sexual morality. Now, you mentioned the issue of the Victorian era. Truth is, I'm getting old, but I know anything much about that era. Except I remember over time, I would have heard about something called a chastity belt. Whether it's real or not, I do not know. But I would agree with those who believe that that was an extreme method of enforcing fidelity. It was a kind of configuration that women were forced to put on when the men go to war, the knights go to war, was hope that the women would not get pregnant or do nothing wrong. But when they came back, the belt was in position, but the women were still pregnant. So I'm going to say that the Victorian people were probably trying to enforce it, but it appears from all saying that they failed. All right. So yes, I would agree that they were somewhat conservative, although it may appear as though they went to the extreme. However, what it does say to me personally, though, is that it points out the difficulty of keeping sinful man in check. And the other final point I mentioned in regards to the part of the question I asked, what makes it right or wrong for the way one would express love in public? Here's my response quickly. I believe that can take us to argue the whole night. But for me, I ain't got all night. But it's my response. Sex is a private affair. And when it comes to public, I consider it pornography. I also will contend, before I pause, that the word comes from a Greek word porneia, which really means whore, which also is associated with the scripture word fornication. I pause on that, and I hope I have answered your questions.
Okay, Pastor, you would have given us more than a mouthful, more than an earful, more than a stomachful. So I want to thank you for your thoughts and sharing them so clearly. Pastor Henry, I would invite you to share yours at this time.
So let me just go straight to the, thank you very much, Sister Sherry. Let me go straight to the question about the expressions of love, what makes it right or wrong for the way one would express love in public. So love expressions are not only time related, but are culturally related. And it is place and or people that make the expression of love in public right or wrong. It's not what is done, it is the people and the place that makes the expression of love right or wrong. Let me give an example. The preacher having said they given the rights and have the people say their vows and so on, he would call on the couple or he call on the groom to kiss the bride in the church. And the longer the kiss and the more passionate the kiss is, the more claps and the more approvals that come from those who are celebrating, including the pastor. A few weeks later, the same pastor is preaching about reconciliation, and there is a rift between husband and wife. And both of them, having paid close attention to the message, realized where they went wrong and decided right there and then, out of love for each other, decided to kiss each other in church. And now everybody's face looks funny because the man is kissing his wife in church at the altar call. So that it is not the kissing that is wrong, but it's the place and the time. A man would think that sees a woman walking through the city, clad in only a bra and a G-string swimsuit, somehow would believe that that is inappropriate. But when 5,000 women dress the same way on Carnival Day or Kadooment Day, it's all right. So that culture and education informs us as to what is right and wrong in our expressions of love. And to a great extent, that has some, that holds true in our Caribbean society.
Yeah.
For example, the stud centers created by the British between 1807 and 1838 has become a part of our love culture among many Black men in the Caribbean. And if you still don't understand what I mean, the musical artists over the years continue to propagate that culture through their music. You only need to listen to the Village Ram, Mr. Benwood Dick, A Deputy is Essential, Line Excuses, Melda, and the list goes on. So there are some expressions of love that have not evolved over the ages, and I hope that they will continue to remain for eternity. Expression of giving and receiving gifts. The expression of quality time spent with each other. Respect, honesty, sacrifice. I hope those sort of expressions would continue. But in truth and in fact, love, the expressions have changed. The expressions of love have evolved. And so that what in our time may be accepted, in my parents' time, it was definitely a taboo. And I believe that for my grandchildren, what we hold to may be, they may think that we are crazy.
Yes.
They may choose to express love in different ways in public. There are some places, I can't remember which city I went to. I think it might have been Shanghai in China, where young people, you see them making love on the train or the bus with no reservations, whatever, kissing and touching and what have you on the bus, on the train filled with people. So that, again, it's time and it's place. And so it's something that we need to understand, that what may be good for the goose in the Caribbean may not be the same for the gander. So I want to pause there.
Thank you, Pastor Henry. What I gathered from both of you is that culture really has impacted the way in which we express love. I remember as a child growing up, I was probably at primary school, and I had a very good friend who lived with her grandparents just up the road from where I used to live. And I would never forget one evening we were doing our homework, and Doug and Julie, everyone knows Days of Our Lives, was on. And Doug proceeded to kiss Julie, and the grandfather shouted, "Turn off the TV, turn off the TV, turn off the TV." And I was so confused. I think I was in class 4, so I would have probably been 10, because this gentleman had 14 children. And with my little knowledge, I somehow was confused in why he wanted us not to see Doug kissing Julie. And that would have been years ago. As I said, I would have been 10, around 10. So that could have been like 37, 38 years ago. And I just found it to be strange. And I like what you said about Shanghai, because when I in Barbados, we do not openly share love, even parents. We're now seeing it more whereby a child who leaves the house, you kiss them and say, "Have a wonderful day," and you send them off. I even see dads, well, I can't tell you for sure. I've seen dads kissing boys and sending them off, but I've seen dads showing more expressions of love when their boy children are going off. I see them hug and kiss the girls. However, I find that over time, we have been able to express more openly our affection. And I love this part for our children. And I'm one of those who, years ago, you would see people walking and holding hands and you would look or you will stare. But really and truly, you were staying because, that is what you would want, but that's not what you are getting. And I find it to be okay to hug and to kiss. However, a little further than that, well, that's a bit debatable. I would have heard Pastor Henry speak about the couple who wanted to reconcile at the altar and they kissed. I didn't see anything wrong with that. But as I said, that's debatable. And we don't want to get into that now. I believe we can have a program later down for that. But I want to tell you that both of you, your what you shared just now was quite interesting. As we move along, I want to ask if there's anyone in the audience who wants to, if they have any questions, would want to share something here at this time.
If you just probably could have them just write them in the chat for the time.
Okay, just share them in the chat and I'll read them from there.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting one, which goes along with what Pastor Henry would have shared earlier. In Saudi Arabia, it is illegal for a man to kiss his wife on the cheek in public. How far do you think government should go to restrict the expressions of love in public? Pastor Griffith, I'm going to start back with you because we just ended with Pastor Henry. Would you like me to read it over for you? Because it seems a little... Pastor, you're muted. You're muted, Pastor.
No, I don't think you need to go back over. I think
Okay.
I understood the question. I think so. Now, my first response is, don't ever be surprising, is that governments have no right to try to restrict the expression of love in the public. And I think that Madam Moderator, you would appreciate this point, because I think you were alluding to this just now as you spoke. Because I'm maintaining that love really is kindness we show to each other. And therefore, it must be expressed. We need it. Now, in regards to Saudi Arabia, I don't know if I'll get there one of these days, but I've never been there. But to us and to me, I will admit, it seemed fairly extreme in some of the things that these countries do. But again, culture is culture, so maybe. But I take it, however, that even though we consider it extreme, what I think Saudi Arabia in their own way is doing is they are affirming the privacy of sex. I, however, see nothing wrong with a man kissing his wife in the public or even his children in the public. You can understand the context in which I'm speaking. All right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the objector, I said earlier, is having sex in the various forms in public, which I said earlier is pornography.
Yeah.
Now, what therefore I suppose the question is referring to is the various ways in which we are having sex in public. All right? Which again, repeat, I say should not happen. The problem is, we Westerners, I can say that, we are proponents of what I call liberalism. And we know what that means. Our governments do not feel constrained by those of us because I believe that I am conservative. I really don't expect them to do anything about it. I don't expect them to. I don't expect the government to. I can tell you what I think though. I think the church has a duty to speak out just as the prophets did. We need more people like John the Baptist. We have no problem, the church have no problem in being the lone voice in the wilderness. I believe that is what we have to do, right? And I believe that even though that there are steps to stop us from doing that. And one of the things that make me a little bit concerned is this word tolerance. In my narrow understanding, I know where words are changing and redefining every day. Tolerance means coming to a position for me, you can disagree, where what these people do no longer bothers me. Now, my problem with that is I am forced to remember law. The Bible says in one translation, as for that righteous man who lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over the lawless deeds that he saw and heard. In the same way, the Bible speaks about Genesis, how when God saw what man was doing, and it just grieved God's heart to the point where he actually repented making man. So my point is that I think that Saudi Arabia is also demonstrating that they believe that certain things ought to be done in private. I believe that government in Barbados, for example, or Westerners governments are between a rock and a hard place because they got support liberalism, which is contrary to those who are conservative. I saying the church has a big role to play. I have no dependence upon government. I pause.
Pastor Henry, let's hear your thoughts.
So let me start with the laws first. I believe that whatever laws the government makes, the Christian should subject himself or herself to the law, even when that law is contrary to Christian beliefs and practices. That's my first point.
You want 10%, but that's all right.
Whatever laws the government makes, the Christian should subject himself or herself to the law when the law is even when the law is contrary to Christian beliefs and practice. When the Christian's obedience to God conflicts with the law, that does not mean that the Christian has the right to overthrow the government. So even though the law is in conflict with Christian beliefs, it does not give the Christian the right to overthrow the government. The Christian must still subject and submit himself to the law of the land. That's what the Bible teaches. Daniel is a good example. He subjected himself to the law, yet he maintained his faith and accepted the consequences for disobeying the law of the land, as did the apostles. So governments often reflect the religious beliefs of the society that they govern. And it's their responsibility to be the morality police of those whom they rule. As Christians, whether there is a law or not that govern our expression of love in public, we should ensure that our freedom to engage in any act does not negatively affect other persons. So Paul would write, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. So I would like to think that from this particular passage, that we ought to, as Christians, we should realize that whatever we do to God, whether we make love in public, at private, or what have you, it is not simply because of my conscience. You understand? Not because of my conscience. It is simply because of the other people's conscience. Those weak brothers who cannot eat meat offered to idols, and who cannot, you hear the meat is offered to idol, you can't eat it. Well, I can. It doesn't bother me because the idol is nothing to me. But I will not eat it because I don't want the weak brother to stumble. So I could kiss my wife in church, and I could make love to my wife on a Sunday morning in church. But because other people would stumble, I rather not do that, because I am not in church for my own good and for my own benefit. I am simply there so that others may be saved. And so I think when you come to this particular question, if I go to Saudi Arabia, I am not going to touch my wife. I'm not going to kiss her. I'm not going to do anything like that, because that's what the law says. And if I choose to, then I cannot go out there and proclaim that the law is bad and the law evil and these people, they're harsh and what have you. That's their law, and I'm supposed to respect their law. If I go to another community where it is legal for men to be sleeping with their wives on the street corners in public and what have you, I'm not going to stumble about it, because everybody is doing it. I am not necessarily going to do it. So I think that on these issues, we have to understand that we need to understand people's culture, people's behavior. And in this whole process of love's evolution, mind you, I mean, I like the point that you made. What was not accepted 38 years ago is now accepted.
Yes.
And I always tell people that, I mean, I was probably about 8 or 9 years of age, and to show how reserved things were with parents, my brother pushed me under the bed and told me there was a box there to go look at the box. And when I brought it out, I mean, poor me, I just came out and look at the word, spell the word, and a big shout out, modest is modest. And I got a good cut skin because I went and looked at the boxes. When I became much older, 10 or 15 years, 10 or 12 years old, that I understood modest was a sanitary napkin, and my mother's sanitary napkin, I had no right to even see it. You understand? So all things change, and we have to understand that. So the next generation, they may make love to you in such a way in public, they may be so graphic in public that you may feel that they're sick or something. But it's the time, it's the place, and the people that make what is done correct, acceptable. Not what is done, but it's what the time and the people, according to Paul, the eating of meats. Nothing is wrong with the eating of meats, but it's the people and the place that makes it acceptable or not acceptable.
I think I would want to respond a little bit. Pastor Henry teased me a little bit, but I need to say 2 things. And the first one I'll probably say is that, and it borders on the question of subjectivity and even what that which is relative or debate about relativity. The Bible still remains a standard. And if I do not refer or understand the Bible standards, I will have difficulty personally when I go doing Christian mission, right? Where clearly I have a people who have not been exposed to what I think is clear. I'm not dealing with any those areas that are not clear. Where there's a clear, for example, I go to Saudi Arabia and I saw the people down there worshiping some gods that they made out of rock stones. You know what I mean? That's the culture, and that's accepted, and they got a big party every 5 years that they do every year. There is nowhere that this Bible person who is conservative based on the word can accept it. There's no way that Joseph can say that whatever the government say, I must obey. I don't see that in scripture. And I pause and I say one thing. I pause on this one. Daniel, for example, Daniel did not agree with the king. He king that he don't worship. Don't pray to this man so that we can see. If you be God, you can see, but I can pray. Whatever it costs me, I will do that which I know my Bible tell me. Pause.
Pastor, you didn't listen to me. I said that if you have to do something that is out of your conscience because of your belief system, then you accept the consequences. You don't try to overthrow the government. That's what Daniel did.
I ain't discussing overthrow the government.
But that is what some of us try. That is what some Christians try to do. So
and
on the note of I think you mentioned pornography. You go to Swaziland. I'm not sure if Bishop Gao is with us this evening, but you go to Swaziland, and all of the maidens under 20, I think, I can't remember the exact age, but all of the young ladies, the virgins, they line the street like carnival and walk the street and dance the street for the king, bare-breasted. How would you call that pornography?
All I say is that as a missionary, I still have certain biblical things I need to project. And the question about conversion and I'm sorry the pastor is not here to help me to understand how he do handle what the Bible says in regards to this culture, but I pause.
All right, so we've had a little heated discussion there about Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to bring it right to Barbados and Trinidad. Mm-hmm. Only recently in Trinidad, there would have been Carnival. And we know Trinidadians love to party. In recent times, we have copied more of your costumes, which would be feathers and little to next to nothing. And the Barbadians have now accepted that. And that's basically what we have for our crop over as well. Mm-hmm. Recently, I think it was last year, crop over, persons were talking about the lewd behavior that was exhibited last crop over. And as a female myself, I remember years ago before becoming saved, you jump and you jump in things that you taught at that time, were okay, but yet still you didn't want to be out. You would stay among the group. You didn't gonna come out the group because you don't want everybody to see you. In the group is one thing, but now you are seeing persons, for lack of a better word, we were talking about expressions of love in public. Now, what we're seeing is total expression. I don't know if it's expression of love, but total expressions of what our dear pastor here would say, pornography in public. Now, I cannot speak about Trinidad. I can only speak about Barbados. Even when you go through your Instagram, sometimes things pop up on the feed and you're wondering, how is this possible? Why are you doing this? It is not something that is tasteful. Now, when we speak of it like that, because it can go from one extreme to another, this is not persons kissing in church, Pastor. This is persons, for a better word, for lack of a better word, twerking or doing other things that are very confusing and mind-boggling. And I would say, it says, what makes it, do you think governments should go and restrict the expressions of love in public? I have heard so many persons, obviously, might I say this, persons of a certain age bracket, let's say 40 and over, or 45 and over, who would have been a bit disturbed by it. However, the younger persons were not. They're okay to express themselves as that. Now, I am not going to ask you gentlemen to comment on that because I guess we'll continue debating on that. But I have an even more interesting question to pose to you too. Homosexuality has been in the human family for eons. It is a form of expressing love between two people of the same sex. Should governments in the West serve as a morality police? And since sexual sins are crimes of the heart, how does a government execute judgment against such? Pastor Henry, I'm going to start with you.
The church may see the state as the morality police of the nation. But Christians in the West do not live in a theocracy as Israel existed under Moses. And we should recognize that our responsibility to the world is to be teachers and exemplars of morality. So in countries such as Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia that operate as theocracies, Christians should be mindful of the religious laws and, like Paul, try to become all things to all men. That I might by all means save some. In democracies where everyone has certain rights, governments must be careful that they ensure that everyone has the same rights under the law, regardless of gender, color, or religious persuasion. The church should seek to persuade leaders to maintain an impartial system and should be careful not to advocate for the deprivation of some rights because they may be different to yours as a Christian. Like making the headgear that the Muslim women wear illegal in a country that isn't a Muslim country, or restricting rights of the LGBTQ group that other groups enjoy. So that's my take on the whole idea of the government. But it would be a conflict of conscience. So let's say we introduce laws in the Christian laws to deal with the LGBTQ people. because it doesn't make sense talking, and it doesn't make sense just talking about government if you do not have laws and punishment. It doesn't make sense having laws if there is no consequence for breaching those laws. And so if as Christians we push the idea that we must punish these people who practice such behavior, I am thinking about the Christian judge who sends a man to prison for a crime of homosexuality. And I'm wondering, what will he do if a person who is an adulterer is brought before him, if he will send that person to jail also? And if we are advocating that the homosexuality should be a law on the books of our country, then shouldn't there be a law against adultery? And one must ask, when we make such suggestion, how will the police arrest someone who looks at a woman and lusts? Because that too, in the eyes of Christianity, is adultery. So Christians who have taken the hostile approach to the LGBTQ community should recognize that these people have been in our community and churches, and I say churches, for years. And the rest of us in society did nothing but to scorn them. Our big problem today is that we cannot silence them anymore. They are now in our faces and proud of who they are. We should have answered this question 40 years ago. How do we win these people to Christ? And I say, the quicker we find the answer, the quicker we find the answer to that question, we would better be able to deal with people who of a different approach to their sexuality than ours. So the church failed and continue to fail in its responsibility to execute the mission of Jesus that Jesus gave his disciples give to his disciples. Go teach all men to observe what I taught you. Over the years, we have adopted the Moses approach in dealing with sexual immorality, the approach of the law. And when you are caught, you will be punished, stoned to death, embarrassed. That's the approach that we, the church, have taken. Yet in the church, the wise girls, they do the same things as the foolish ones. Just that the wise one remain in the choir because they know how to use contraceptives. This happened because we ignored the New Testament approach to teaching our youths about sex and sexuality. And just read 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and you would hear Paul is saying, shy away from immorality. He doesn't say do not commit sexual immorality. Stay away from immorality. And whereas in the Old Testament you have thou shalt not, thou shalt not. Here Paul is saying, you do that because you stay away from sexual immorality, because your body is God's temple. Hence, you are to glorify God in your body. So you see yourself differently, not as one who is just living by laws. And that has been our problem, I think, as a church over the years. We have stuck with the Old Testament laws. We come to the New Testament and we hear Paul talk about the laws and what have you and so on, how they have done away and grace has stepped in. But we haven't a clue as to what we understand them, because in practice, we revert to the same thing. I grew up in church as a young person in church where the laws were very strict. You couldn't talk to the girls outside of the church. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do this. And the problem is not about what you do or what you don't. The problem is about what is in your heart. And so if we get people to understand who they are and get the heart made right with God, we don't have all the do's and the don'ts. And instead of fighting with the LGBTQ movement, I think that we should be thinking and praying so that God would give us direction how we can win these people to Christ. It's my comment.
Thank you so much, Pastor Henry. Pastor Griffin?
In my response, I don't want to dwell, neither am I going to try to rebut everything that Pastor said. But I would want to say that I very much find myself on the opposite end to much of what I think he said there just now. Yes, I know I keep the discussion oftentimes throw in some points that I cannot find fair nor reasonable, and we will go on the whole night contending. But I have difficulty, for example, remember I mentioned the word tolerance and how much we accept the changing things. I told you I'm conservative, and I do not apologize for that. I do not know how I can imagine that one day I get a new pastor and my pastor openly is gay. I think fundamentally that goes contrary to the word, and I cannot support that. However, it's not mean to pick out those things I disagree with, but I just want to suggest that Pastor and I are on two different levels. However, my response to the question, however, is that I agree in regards to the question that you said, that homosexuality has been in the family, the human family, for donkey years, my words. But I would also want to pose a question and ask, do we not also agree that incest has been with us for donkey years also? And can anybody help to understand the difference between the two? I don't know. And why should one be condemned and not the other? Why should we not also consider, if we can consider the homosexuals showing love to one another, then why should it be wrong for me in having sex with my child not also be showing my love to that child? Is there a difference? I need to understand the difference. Let's talk, for example, of Barbados, which I know, right? We have a sexual offenses act. The paragraph that deals with incest says this, section 3 of that, and I quote, "A person who commits the offense of incest is liable of conviction on indictment to imprisonment. A, if committed by an adult with a person under 14 of age, for life. Incest for life. All right? B, if committed by an adult with a person 14 years of age or more, for 10 years. And C, if committed between minors 14 years of age or more, 2 years. Now, in our country, we have a law that says incest is wrong. And we just heard that these homosexuals are expressing their love. All right? So I'm actually pointing the inconsistencies of the world in which we live. The world gone mad.
Yes,
right?
I quite agree with you, Pastor.
Just hold. I can stop. Let me go on. Let me go on. I also believe that the Western government, we asked about Western government serving as morality police. All right? I don't know what you call the one I just made, the example I just raised in Barbados, right? What seems certain for me is that Western governments acknowledge that they have a role pertaining to what I call public decency. However, again, I believe that they find themselves between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the liberals and the energy and the violence with which they pursue their agenda. I cannot understand the term about sexual sins are crimes of the heart. I don't know what that term means, but I can respond to it this way, right? I believe that all sins come from the heart because Matthew 15:19 says, From out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, slander. Now that seems to suggest to me that, and it pick out murder, and is not fear. I condemn adultery, I condemn sexual immorality, I condemn all them things. So anybody who suggests that I only talk about homosexuality and not adultery, come on, that have a conversation here. I dismiss that. All right? Now, a closing. Now, so my point is that all sins come from the heart. And if murder comes from the heart, my question is, or my position is, would we really say then that Barbados law convicts people for murder and put in prison to life? I pause.
Okay, I just want to remind you two gentlemen, our program is 1 hour, and I'm going to ask you to tighten up, Pastor Henry. So you want to
so let me just respond here.
Okay.
What is the punishment for adultery on the books of Barbados?
Is there one?
I let that question pass. That's the way hand I will let pass.
I am done. And that's how we see things. And I'm saying that as a Christian church, we cannot condone adultery. We do not condone homosexuality. We do not condone any of these things. But I think what happens with many of us, especially as preachers, we so much want to be like Eve, to become God, to decide what is right and wrong for other people. Why, if we can leave the adulterer to be judged by God in the final judgment, why can't we leave these two consenting adults who decide to breach the laws of God? Why can't we leave them to be judged by God in the final judgment? Why do we hear them?
It's what John Baptist should have done in the case of Herod, and he would have lived.
No, the commission that John the Baptist had was not the commission that Jesus Christ gave to his disciples. The commission that Ezekiel had was not the commission that Jesus Christ gave to his disciples. Our commission is to go and teach, educate, and to help people to come to know Christ as their Lord and Savior.
In every instance, whatever the case is, if a Christian does not tell that individual whatever the case is, and is not limited to any subject we will say this evening, if the Christian cannot show that man that his lifestyle is sin without any doubts, he has difficulty proclaiming the gospel.
And what do you do after you have told him? What is your responsibility after you have told him?
I don't know.
Well, I know, and that's why I'm telling you. Your responsibility is to simply tell the gospel. The gospel is the power of God to save. It is not for you to judge the man. It is not for you to save the man. If the man chooses to do what he wants, God will judge him. And that has been our big problem. I remembered my first trip to Barbados back in 1971. My mother said to me, if something falls in the street, don't bend over and pick it up because somebody going to jump on your back. But that was the bias. That was the bias. That was what we were taught about these people. We denigrated them. And sadly, as a church, we have never asked ourselves the question, how can we help them?
My finest.
When the HIV/AIDS came, there was a gentleman, his partner died, and he gave his life to Christ, became a member of the Adventist Church. And he invited me to his house to preach to a few of these guys, about 7 or 8 of them. And they were very much wanting to break the lifestyle and to come to know Christ. But which church are they going to? Which church are they going to? They have for years walked funny, dressed funny, and they can't break that habit overnight. Which church are they going to and be accepted?
My final comments in regards to it is that I'm not going to respond to some of the statements that you made because I do not hold some of the, I suggest, assumptions that you put forward. Maybe there are other people who may have those positions, and therefore I don't think that they relate to me. But the dilemma that Christians have is how far east is west, and to what extent do we find out that one day we live in a society that is totally bad and one that we have actually tolerated and where we have backslidden without realizing it. That is only the perspective that I'm bringing here. I pause.
Thank you so much, Pastor Henry. I'm not going to allow you to say anything at this
I'm
point
not
in
saying
time.
anything more.
Okay, I knew that one would have been a bit controversial, but however, I'm glad that you would have both shared your views and that you would have used the references, biblical references. And Pastor Griffith, I want to thank you for even going and pulling down the laws of Barbados so that those things could be shared. And later on, we can reflect and we can do a deeper search, a deeper dive into this. However, I want to remember those who are on. You can share, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll get back to you. I see that there are 2 in the chat already, and I'm going to ask this last question, and then after I'll come back in and answer your questions. Final questions. Pastor, let's try to keep it whereby you both agree on this one. What should be the role of parents and church leaders to educate young people about sexual expressions, be it in private or public? What should be the role of parents and church leaders to educate young people about sexual expression, be it in private or in public? Pastor Griffith, I'm going to start with you. You're muted, Pastor. As the pastor unmutes, he's not yet unmuted. Just want to remind you to put your questions in the chat and we'll answer them directly after.
All right, I'll answer that briefly. I think that both parents and the church have a responsibility to educate youth about the proper place and use of sex. I believe that sex should be reserved for relationships that have evolved from, is it the frontal lobe here? Where scientists, as scientists put it, where we can feel a high from the surge of adrenaline and all the other dopamine and serotonin and all them are brain release, right? Somebody call it horny feeling that may havoc to our lives. I think the problem is that many parents themselves are either ignorant or themselves are too liberal to teach otherwise. That alone only emphasizes the role of the church. But fewer parents are sending their children to Sunday school or even to church. What it suggests strongly is then the church definitely have a role. But I end by saying that if the mountain don't come to Muhammad, it is time that the church get out and carry the mountain to Muhammad. That's my submission.
Thank you so much, Pastor Griffith. Pastor Henry?
This responsibility, according to Paul, rests with the fathers. And there are some versions of the scripture that translate that word father in Ephesians 6:4 to parents. It says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. The implication here is that the child, as in its physical development, must be fashioned through training or discipline. And that training or discipline must be based on the Lord's standards and through instructions. And so it's training and instruction, discipline and knowledge. what to do and how to do it. You cannot teach a child about nuclear physics without using the word atom. And I would like some parents to start to think in some way how they can start talking to their child and talking and using words like penis and vagina to their child. And that has been one of our big problems. We allow our children to learn what they see on television because we are afraid to say certain things to our children. And the church responsibility is to teach those parents. Let the parents learn to teach their children, and let the parents teach. So you teach the parents and let the parents teach the children. Get this whole thing about people have to get down to where children are. I may have mentioned it on this program. There's some language outside there about love and what have you and so on, that some of us aren't even as adults aware of. I was over the Christmas in a conversation with some adults, and my little grandchild was there, just 11 years of age. And she referred that the person that we were talking about needed a wingman. And so I had to, why is that? Because it was the first time I'm hearing the term. And when the wingman was explained to me, the word was used correctly. And so when we start with these subjects, we just can't go there with the fornication and adultery and what have you. We have to learn to get to the place where parents have to understand the language of the young people and communicate with them. That's what education is all about. And you are a teacher, so you know, I think you fully agree with me. We are communicating with people with language that they don't, you know, they no longer use. The words are archaic. They're out of use, out of style, and we need to get to the place where we can communicate with them in order to train them and instruct them.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Henry, and thank you, Pastor Griffith. At this time, I would like you to share your closing remarks. I believe that would have been a good wrap up, but I believe you have to go all the way back to try to wrap this one up.
You have the questions in the chat.
I have the questions in the chat. I was going to, okay, let me try answering them now. I'm going back to Maria. Good night, Sister Maria. You would have shared, in my view, Carnival and Propover is not expressions of love. It might be closer linked to lust or affection or the act of revelry. Maybe a more definite explanation of expressions of love is needed. Pastors, I'm going to ask you to speak on that briefly. One of you, either of you.
For a number of the what you call the revelers, a number of them engage in acts of love, passionate. Let me say they engage in passionate acts on the street, in the kissing and the fondling and what have you and so on. As far as I was told, so that they are public expressions of love. You see it on the television that some of them, they whether they are drunk or not, they do express themselves in passionate ways to each other while they're on the street. So yes, there may be a revelry and what have you, but they are public expressions of love also there.
Yes, I agree with that. Pastor Griffith, you wanted to share something there, or may I move on?
I can see where Maria is, and I might find myself supporting her in the matter.
Okay, thank you. Brother Arthur, he would have asked, how do we impact change to change the morality of our fellow beings? Or do we have a mandate to change that form of living from the Bible? That's either for you, Pastor Henry, or you, Pastor Griffith.
My response to it quickly is that the Christians have a mandate from God and from the Bible, how we put it, to point men help people to understand the distance from God and what is the cause of that distance, and to use the way that Christ have laid out to show them how to return to God. And in so doing, it's actually, I spoke earlier about Genesis and what mankind had become and what it did to God and what God's intention was to destroy. And then he said, I will not again destroy the flood, but we know what the net destruction is. And still, the whole point is that our ultimate job is to save man from himself. In other words, we must bring about change by proclaiming God's standard. I pause.
And I want to add to that, that effectiveness in the first century, there has been no era that the church has been more effective than in the first century, with all its carnality and what have you. The geographic area where the gospel spread in those first 100 years, it took centuries, many years, thousands of years later to accomplish what those apostles did. And I think one of the keys with that is that those apostles, they knew how to become all things to all men.
Thank you both. And finally, we have from the Henrys, I think parents must bear in mind that they cannot teach children about morality when their actions do not match their words. We must practice what we preach. And that's not a question, that's a statement. And I believe that we all can agree to that. We know that people live what they learn what they live. So that is a good way. Pastor, you're shaking your head. I don't know if I said something.
No, I said they live what they learn. No, I said they live
yes,
what
they live what they learn. They live what they learn. Thank you. I want to thank all of you. And now I'm going to ask both of you to share your final comments. Pastor Griffith, I'm going to start with you.
All right, let me see. Here is my final words. I think that love, it is a word, is our good-naturedness to each other. And it really has nothing to do at all with sex. It's the quality of relationships that grows over time. Where that relationship involves the opposite sex, it is possible that the couple may want to demonstrate the intensity of that relationship by committing to each other for life. In my opinion, sex is the ultimate expression of that relationship. And sex is a private act between couples. I said that earlier. There is relationship scientists and marriage therapists on all nine things and teaching psychology that says, I don't know, I need to call your name, that, and I quote, while feelings, I'm quoting, while feelings completely wrapped up in another person at the beginning of relationship may be exciting and feel wonderful, it is the relationship that relies solely on passionate love that are doomed to fail. He goes on. Passionate love is intense and very reciprocal, and when we reciprocated, is an exciting and wonderful experience. Finally, compassionate love, on the other hand, is not as intense, but involves the sense of commitment and intimacy. And he said, think total self-disclosure, not necessarily having sex. Having both present makes a successful partnership. I maintain that love is a relationship that grows over time. And a lot of the love man-woman problems that we have is because we get tied up in the emotional brain issues and never get to build true relationship. But love only evolves in the sense of the relationship. I pause. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pastor Griffith. Pastor Henry?
Love expresses itself in many forms. And I think the person, the Henrys who asked the last question, That is so pertinent that if you cannot, if you do not have trust, if you cannot trust the person, if you're in a relationship where you can't forgive somebody done something and you can't forgive. As a matter of fact, I think the pastor quoted 1 Corinthians 13, and one of the things it says about love is that it keeps no record of wrongs, and I love that part of it. And so when the person does the offense, what you may think is a second time, that is supposed to be the first time because there was no record of the first time. Those are expressions of love and they wouldn't change. But as society changes, as people change, we must understand that people would express, and their expression of love may reflect in different ways. And so what our understanding of our expression of love in our youthful days and growing up to now, that is changing and will continue to change. And it does not mean ours is biblical or scriptural. As a matter of fact, a few generations before, if they did what some of us do in public, those preachers would have thought that we were unholy. And so with things changing, let us understand that the standards as far as the expressions are concerned, they can change. And they will change even in our time because of place and culture and what have you. And so when we are dealing with individuals, when we are into relationships, it is important to understand that because you may enter and you may fall in love with someone who has a different cultural orientation to expressing love than yourself. And it's no secret if you've been sitting in the counseling room long enough, even within the bedroom, certain expressions that are there can be acceptable for one partner and unholy for the other. And so we need to understand that expressions of such nature, whatever form it is, it must rest with both individuals. And the key to all of that is remember, you are not here to please yourself. You're here to please others. And you may have rights, but your rights are not your rights until you give them up to someone else.
Thank you so much, Pastor Henry. And I want to thank all of you who were tuned in this evening. It seems like we're going to have to ask Real Talk to bring another series on expressions of love, because our topic today was the evolution of love, but we kept going at forms and expressing love. So I think that was kind of interesting. I'm totally intrigued. And I think that I will put it to the producers and the organizers of Real Talk for us to have a session on expressions of love. Once again, I want to thank you. You've been gracious. We thank you for sharing. And as we sign off of YouTube, I'm going to stay on just for a few minutes so that if you have any questions and you want to ask, we'll be here to answer them for you. Thank you again. We want to welcome you back.
Yes, Sister Sherry, before you go, I noticed Reverend Garway is with us. I'm not sure if you want to ask him to say a word for us, please. He is there with us. That's the gentleman who is married to the lady.
I know that you wanted to ask the question.
Yes.
Good night, Reverend Garway. Are you there?
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Why were you so quiet?
I just wanted to listen. When Pastor Henry is there, there's enough rockers on.
No, we want some more rockers. I'm sure about that. So you don't go anywhere. We'll continue with you briefly. But we have one more question in our chat.
Not a question.
It's not a question, actually. It's not a question. I just want to thank all of you again. And please do stay on for our after party. where we discuss a little bit more, not for a lengthy time, but you're welcome to stay on with us and share any comments or any questions you may have. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next week, where we'll have another interesting topic. Do come again.
So, Bishop, in
Yes.
relation to your adopted country and the
Mhm.
Caribbean, what is if let me ask, if what is your culture is brought to the Caribbean, how are we supposed to accept that?
First, Pastor Henry, might I ask?
That's Pastor Henry, that's a very difficult question. You understand? You know? But to me, I don't have a problem with polygamy. You understand? So personally, on a personal level, because I see it as scriptural. Once you can tell me that Solomon, David, and quite a few of the kings, and including Jacob, is in heaven, I don't see that God can be charging somebody else. Now, I myself am not going to go down that line because I have been trained in a different culture. Right? That affects my conscience and the development of my conscience has developed. My wife also assures me very much that is confusion and trouble. When I tease her from time to time, you know. It's a nice headache, you know. I might have more difficulty with polyandry, and there are 50 cultures in the world where women marry multiple husbands, including places like Nepal, and they don't do it for lust, they do it because of land problem, etc. So what 3 or 4 brothers might marry the same woman, etc. They share a night with her, and the children are considered the collective responsibility, you know. So, there's some serious thing when we start looking out there in the world, because sometimes we think our little world is the whole world, you know. So that since I've started studying and looking and searching to see what out there. So I don't know what I have to seriously consider if I am called to preach in such an area, how I will handle this. You understand? Because there are consequences to shove. Just as much as the English created problems for other people, we can also be translating culture, not scripture.
That's
so we have
right.
to be very careful concerning that, you know. Now, the part that I was wondering, you know, there's a place in 1 Timothy that said the law is good if it be used properly. So there is a place for us using it. The thing about it is that we can't get the government to agree with everything, but in any area they want to agree that, as far as the scriptural is concerned, I am okay if adultery became a punishable law. All right, it became a punishment. So I think we'd have less adultery, and I think that would actually do good for society. You know, in the sense, and again, in the sense that sometimes, something that somebody said just now, there, what becomes the things that our parents force us to do, it becomes our normal practice. So that there's some people who cannot leave their beds in the morning without making it up, because it was drilled into them. And sometimes the reason why you need to have law is because of the fact that man is lawless until he comes to a personal revelation through Christ. So the Bible does say, have no fellowship with the unrighteous works of darkness, but rather reprove them. So we do have a responsibility to speak out, not just against LGBTQ, but again, we need to add A to that too, adultery and fornication. You know?
Yes.
You know? But I think part of the reason why we're coming up against, and people are speaking out so much against the LGBTQ, is because they're in our children's face. They're in our face. They're not just behind. The person who's committing adultery is hiding.
But shouldn't we have been in their faces instead with the gospel?
But I don't think, Pastor Henry, let's say, you've been preaching now for how long? 50 years?
More, yeah, about that, yes.
Right. And you have done it. So to say we haven't done it, it doesn't mean
no. Let me tell you what we have done.
Okay.
We have gone on the platforms and we have called out these people, and we have actually made them, as a matter of fact, in certain societies, the way some of us preach, we would end up in courts for creating speeches of hate against a particular group.
Okay. I accept what you just said there. I can accept that. So we were not proactive as far as reaching out to these people.
Exactly.
I know I had at one time, and I don't want to make this out of this in a kind of way. I did have a group of people belonging to that group in my church but I had to deal with it very gently. And eventually, I don't know what happened. They left, I don't know why. But so if they come, I will receive them, but I will also be spending time watching them and speaking to them.
That's
Because
right.
one of the things I don't want to have happen is that, like, for instance, there's a church we are connected to in South Africa. And what we found out is that the song leader there, apparently, he has been converting people into the LGBT whatever. You understand? So this is one of the things you have to be very careful. So I don't know what he's doing in private. No, I don't have all the details. My wife has been kind of helping me to try and understand what happened. But young people would come in, they join the choir, and after you start seeing them acting differently, and then some people would run away and leave.
Yes.
You know? But we need to actively, if we're going to deal with this thing, then the eldership of the church, senior people have got to be able to speak positively and seriously about the issue, because a person, just as much as if you had somebody coming in and say, Bishop, it's not a problem with pedophilia, I am going to warn them about the scenario, and I don't want to see them playing with the children in the church. You understand? Because those are serious issues.
But it's the same thing, because you have people you
Pastor,
talk to
one
people.
second. Did you end the YouTube feed?
Oh, sorry.